gave birth to over 70 children and held him as if he were a prisoner. A case that happened to a 20-year-old Soviet soldier and 9 Japanese women. Greetings! Today, we will talk about what happened to a Soviet soldier who transported Japanese girls to Siberia after the end of World War II. And also, we will learn about the further fate of these people. For what purpose the USSR Army transported Japanese prisoners after the end of the war? It is true that the Japanese women gave birth to 73 children from a 20-year-old soldier, and under what circumstances it happened. Whether the man really escaped from the Japanese girls who held him as if he were a prisoner. And why the former soldier appreciated the prison sentence for desertion and evasion of service. Be sure to watch the video to the very end so you don't miss all the key details on the topic. Restoration of the country's economy. As you already know from history lessons, World War II ended after the surrender of Japan. Moreover, the Soviet Union had a significant impact on the defeat of the enemy in the land of the rising sun. Nevertheless, in 1945, the USSR Army had 600,000 Japanese prisoners of war. Among them were also girls who during the war served as radio operators, nurses, and some of them even provided services in night brothels. It is no secret that during the war years, the economy of the USSR was destroyed. A huge number of cities and other settlements suffered, which needed careful restoration. In 1945, the High Command decided to use prisoners of war as cheap labor. But first, it was necessary to distribute the POWs to specific territories. This is where the story of 20-year-old Dmitry Bozhnikov and 9 Japanese prisoners of war begins. On the face of it, the task was quite simple: to deliver prisoners of war with food and ammunition accompanied by 2 trucks. The final destination was Siberia. People were needed in this region to rebuild lost settlements and other resources after the war. A desperate situation. We draw your attention to the fact that Dmitry Bozhnikov was driving one of the trucks. After the briefing, the vehicles set off on the road. But since the events took place at the beginning of winter in permafrost conditions, the route was not so easy. In addition, there was a snowstorm, because of which the trucks went off the planned route. To be more precise, the first truck turned to another direction, and the next one followed it. It was Bozhnikov who was driving the last one. Alas, the truck ahead accidentally ran into a minefield. It was here that the Soviet soldiers mined the area to stop the advance of Japanese troops during one of the battles. As a result of the explosion, the entire 3-man train died on the spot. Another truck was also damaged, but this time, everyone survived. In the end, 3 soldiers and 9 Japanese girls were left among uncharted territory. In the conditions of frost and uncertainty, Dmitry Bozhnikov instructed 2 of his fellow soldiers to go for reinforcements and report on the situation. So after the latter left, there were 10 men left, Bozhnikov and 9 Japanese POW girls. Unfortunately, time passed, and the comrades with reinforcements never returned. To date, there is a version that 2 soldiers were arrested. Dmitry Bozhnikov decided to retreat with the Japanese deep into the Siberian territory in the hope of reaching people. It was a blessing that there was enough food from the trucks for several months ahead. After that, Bozhnikov and the Japanese women set out to get help. Life in difficult conditions. You would certainly think that 10 people safely went out to the people and were finally rescued. But that wasn't the case. The fact is that there were no signs of civilization nearby. But the soldier and the girls came out to the mountains. On top of that, they were surrounded by forests. In this case, all the skills of survival in the wilderness came in handy. First, people set up a camp and moved there all the most necessary things to maintain vital activity. The Japanese women did not interfere with the young fighter and fulfilled all the requirements of Bozhnikov, because he was the only man who had a firearm. Of course, at first there were difficulties in understanding each other because one spoke in Russian and the rest in Japanese. Later, however, the girls began to understand some words and expressions. It was quite natural that in such unsuitable conditions, it was necessary to look for food. In this difficult moment, the very provisions, which were delivered by trucks, saved us. As we have already mentioned earlier, food supplies were calculated for several months in advance. That's why Dmitry Bozhnikov was not particularly worried about it. But with the onset of summer, the 20-year-old soldier, accompanied by 9 Japanese women, still went out into the forest. They not only hunted wild animals, but also collected mushrooms and berries, which in turn, they prepared for the next winter. There were no difficulties with that as such. A full-fledged family. It is logical to assume that in all this story did not do without lovemaking. Yes, Dmitry Bozhnikov at night really secluded with Japanese women, one by one. But still, there were love affairs. And then what was bound to happen sooner or later happened. Japanese women started getting pregnant by a Soviet soldier. They had to work hard at a kind of housekeeping to provide for the whole family. For example, separate huts were placed throughout the territory occupied by the new family for convenience. And for growing his own crops, Dmitry Bozhnikov built a real vegetable garden. Just imagine, during all the years of his stay in the wilderness, the Japanese women gave birth to 73 children to Bozhnikov. For a minute, all of them lived in the unknown Siberian territory for 19 years. But then, circumstances changed dramatically, and the already former Soviet soldier decided to leave his family and escape. Escape. The fact is that for several years of staying among the female representatives of the female sex, the whole initiative passed into the hands of Japanese women. In fact, they felt the very real matriarchy. Dmitry Bozhnikov Elementary could not withstand such a turn of events. In addition, the man was forced to work both day and night. During the daytime, Bozhnikov performed many household chores. And when night fell, the soldier was alone with several Japanese women at once. The man felt like a prisoner. Eventually, the man's patience ran out. He made an irrevocable decision to leave the women and still find civilization. And so it happened. In an instant, Dmitry left and began to search diligently for the men. It took several days to finally see the nearest settlement. Then the Soviet police came to him, to whom the man reported everything that had happened to him during these 19 years. And at the same time, he was able to point out the location of Japanese women with 73 children. The fate of Bozhnikov and the Japanese women. First, the Japanese women and their children were indeed found. They were safely repatriated and sent to their homeland. There, the Japanese people accepted them, and the government restored the people's rights and freedoms. Henceforth, the Japanese women and their children became full-fledged citizens of the land of the rising sun. Secondly, Dmitry Bozhnikov was still found guilty on several articles: desertion, evasion of military service, kidnapping of captives, etc. The man was sentenced to 12 years in prison and sent to a camp. You will be surprised, but Bozhnikov confessed that in such places it was much easier for him than surrounded by 9 Japanese women and their children. The former military man was released at the age of 51. Conclusion. Thus, the story of Dmitry Bozhnikov and 9 Japanese prisoners of war really evokes a lot of emotions even today, although many people say that it is fiction. Nevertheless, some Japanese and Chinese media repeatedly told the public about such a case.